We already know that divorce is a tough thing for kids to deal with, even when they're adults. How do you deal with your parents' divorce when you're in your 20s? I've got some experience that I think is going to help you with this. Here's the context of why what I have to say might make a difference. I spent almost 13 years of my career, earlier in my career, doing child custody evaluations for the court. These were situations where bitter, angry, divorcing people could not figure out how to share their kids. So I got called in to go in there and see if I could sort things out. See if I could learn what's what and make recommendations back to the court about what should happen with the kids. This is yuck work. It's tough. It's difficult to do that. And I learned some things that I think could be really helpful to you. Here's the first thing, and I am so confident about this, I'm starting with it. This is not about you. Now, I'm assuming because you're watching this video that either you're subscribed to the channel, thank you for subscribing, or you found this in a search because you're in your 20s and you're trying to deal with your parents' divorce. This impacts kids of all ages. And I've talked to a lot of parents who said, well, we're going to stay together until our kids are grown up. Still tough on the kids, isn't it? Here's the confident thing that I mentioned earlier. It's not about you. It is not about you. I have learned this for sure, that it is never, ever about the kids. Now, are there issues related to kids? Yeah, almost always. What I mean is, it's not your fault. It is never, ever the kids' fault. I used to have games with little kids in my office. I'd say, how often is it the kid's fault? And they would respond, never. I'd say, no. Never, ever. And then they'd fix that. No, we don't have to play that same game. But it's never, ever the kid's fault. And I know that there's probably something going on in your mind about, oh, if I would have just, or if I could have been a better son or daughter or whatever. Okay, those are normal thoughts to have, and they're never true. It's not about you. It's never, ever the kid's fault. Are we clear on that? Here's another thing that I learned. There are stories that are created. Stories. When I was doing child custody evaluations for the court, Mom would come in. She'd sit down right over there in that chair and she'd say a story to me about what happened, right? And I would take my notes and I'd, oh yeah, I see what you're saying. You know, I was getting into her story. And then a few days later, Dad came in and he sat in that chair over there and he'd start telling me a story. And I'm taking notes again and I'm like, oh wow. And guess what? Those stories hardly ever matched. They were different stories. Have you noticed this? It's not your job to figure out which story's right. Here's what I learned about that. This story and that story are both a representation of someone's understanding of what happened. It doesn't mean that's what happened. In fact, they're both coming at it from different viewpoints and with different biases and ideas and beliefs. And so this story tells me something about what happened, and this story tells me something about what happened, and the real story isn't either one of them. I'm not saying your parents are lying. They're probably good, honorable people who tell the truth. I'm saying that each of these stories is inadequate in determining what actually happened. What does that have to do with you? It's not your job to figure out which story's right. Even as a trained, paid professional, I couldn't do it. It's not that, oh, well, this is the right story or that is the right story. I take both of them as representations of part of the story. You could do the same thing. And besides, it's not your job to figure out what the real story is. What's your job? Your job is to love them, no matter what, and even if. If they're going through a divorce, they could probably use a little bit of love right about now. It's not your job to figure out, is mom right, is dad right? In fact, you're going to feel this conflict of loyalty. Even as an adult, you're in your own custody now, for Pete's sake. But you still feel the pull, right? And pro-dad is not anti-mom. And pro-mom is not anti-dad. You get to love them both. But because of the stories, they might try to draw you in. Get you into their camp to buy into their story. That's not your job. Your job is to love them, no matter what, and even if. One of the things that I learned as I was doing those child custody evaluations all those years is that divorce brings out the worst in people. Have you noticed this? Because your parents, they're good people, right? But the divorce brings out the worst in people. Wow! Some of the most decent human beings on the planet can turn into kind of monsters when they get sucked into a divorce dynamic. And it doesn't mean that your parents are bad people. I don't think anyone's immune from this. Sometimes when people go through that level of hurt and difficulty and personal challenge, it causes them to act out in ways that are not typical of who they usually are. So remember to be forgiving and tolerant with your parents as they're going through this. I already told you what your job is, to love them no matter what and even if. There's two other things that I want you to understand about what your job isn't. Your job is not courier, to carry messages from one camp to the other. That's dangerous territory. There's landmines in there. Watch out for that. It's not your job to carry messages. When you hear, well, you go tell your father that, or you know what, you should really tell mom. No, decline that job. It's not your job. And you can respectfully decline. You can say, I'm not interested in being the go-between. If it's all the same to you, I'd like to stay neutral. Remember, pro-dad is not anti-mom, and pro-mom is not anti-dad. But they may not know that. So you're going to have to be patient and tolerant with them along those lines. Here's the other one. Don't buy a ticket to the drama. You know what I'm talking about with the drama? You don't have to buy what they're selling. And so when you get sucked into one story or the other, you just bought a ticket to the drama. All right? You don't have to buy that ticket. Let's not go to the drama and stay out of the courier role. For one final point, I want you to know something that took me years to figure out, and I can shortcut this for you. There's a psychological switch that happens when people get divorced. And your parents are not immune from this, so they've probably experienced this. Here's what happens. They create or fabricate or manufacture an ex that they can hate. Here's why. Psychologically, there's this thing called cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance is when our experience doesn't match with our belief system. And so we have to change something in order to bring it out of dissonance and into sync again. Check it out. It's not okay to be divorced from a really awesome person. See, that would be weird. That would be like, well, what's wrong with me if I'm divorced from a really awesome person? So the cognitive dissonance is resolved by divorced people creating an ex that they can hate, an ex that they can blame for everything. And it's not your parent. Unfortunately, it's someone who has the same face, name, social security number as your other parent. But it's not them. It's someone that's been fabricated in your other parent's mind. For you to know this helps you to approach this in a way that's less reactive. So when you hear mom bitterly hating dad, and I hope it's not that bad for you, but I've seen some pretty crazy stuff, Okay? If you hear mom bitterly hating dad, if you hear dad bad-mouthing mom, who are they really attacking? See, it's not your mom. It's not your dad. It's somebody they've created in their own mind that's okay to hate. And honestly, you'd hate him too. This person they fabricated, it's a terrible, horrible, awful, no good, very bad person. You would hate their guts. But it's not your parent. It's someone's been fabricated. Can you latch onto that? Because that will help you not to buy a ticket to the drama. That's going to help you back out of the courier role. That's going to help you to do your real job, which is to love them, both of them, no matter what, and even if. One of the greatest things about my job is that I get to work with people like you. And I'm glad that you joined me here today for this episode. If you haven't subscribed yet to the channel, would you please take a moment to do that? And if you're looking for some additional help, we've got other resources through liveonpurpose.coach. liveonpurpose.coach, where you'll find resources and trained professionals who are ready to assist you with whatever it is that you're working on in your life. I hope to see you again tomorrow. Look into my eyes and never